I was born ready.
We are recording in 5, 4, 3.
Hi everyone, welcome to, whoa, what was that? We might need to do that again. That again, James. We went to the ending somewhere. Sorry, I was almost ready. I was ready to pull the trigger on whatever's coming. That might have been an outro. On the same thing? Oh, you do single then.
Yeah, I got you.
All right. Cool. There's almost shot.
All right, so
That's okay. Quite all right. How you want to do it?
we're going to start again in 5, 4, 3. Not that. 5.
Well, you're gonna roll the intro. Yeah. All right, man.
So when I say go, it's going to be all right. Recording in 5, 4, 3.
Hi everyone, welcome to This Week in Space Science. And I'm Michael Baltimore. It's my pleasure to be here with Dr. Sean Cruzen, the Executive Director of the Coca-Cola Space Science Center here in Columbus, Georgia at Columbus State University. Sean, how are you today?
I'm great, Mike. Thank you for having me in today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and we've got something going on your side of the desk over there. We're going to get to that, but I think we have a very special show today for everybody, our viewers, right here on Columbus State Television, and you've got some news to let everybody know. I know there's a lot of things about to happen, as always, at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center, but today, very, very special announcement, and so we're going to talk about a number of things happening, but a very, very special piece coming your way. So why don't you start us off, tell us about
Okay, well, I'm very excited to be on Columbus State TV today to talk about this very special announcement, as Mike said. There's a new artifact that's going to be coming from NASA to the Coca-Cola Space Science Center here at Columbus State University, and I'll tell you about that momentarily. What I want to remind folks is this. What NASA is working on right now, ladies and gentlemen, they are in the process of working on the next generation spacecraft, which they call the Space Launch System, or SLS. And right now they're in the early stages of that. What they're doing is they're doing a variety of prototype testing. They're actually doing vibration tests and wind tunnel tests with scale model prototypes of the SLS. Many of the components from the SLS, including the solid rocket boosters and the main engines, are actually components that are being reused off the shelf from the space shuttle program.
All right, that's good news. I like that recycling notion there.
That's exactly right. So that if they have systems that are already in place and already proven to work very well, why not use them for the next generation vehicle? That's some of the thought behind SLS. And so solid rocket boosters, where if you look at the model right here, you can see these large white tubes on the outside. These are the solid rocket boosters. Here you see the main tank back here. That's the big orange part. The main engines are right down here. There were 3 main engines on the base of the space shuttle when it flew. And so those systems, which worked tremendously well for the space shuttle in its era, are now going to be used for the Space Launch System, the next generation space vehicle.
Oh, I like that. I like that notion too, because listen, there was nothing wrong with the space shuttle in terms of the reliability and how many missions it flew, and those engines and all the technology. We don't need to just discard that and start over. We need to make sure that that kind of continues in this process.
The space shuttle main engines, which are known as the RS-25 engines, of all the flights of the shuttle, they only had one engine failure in flight. And even that engine failure, because of the redundancy built in that space shuttle system, managed to make it into orbit safely. And so again, you're right, that's a very reliable engine system. It's a proven technology with the solid rocket boosters. There was the Challenger accident, unfortunately, that was caused by one of the solid rocket boosters, but then those technologies were improved. It also, flight specifications, when they could fly, they got a better handle on those things, and then they flew the shuttle very, very reliably after that based on the engine systems. So that's the rationale behind why they're using those engine systems for that next generation spacecraft. And we're going to talk a little bit more about prototype testing as we go through the show today. But just as a reminder for folks, the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle program began well before the first flight. Now, the Space Shuttle program, in terms of flights, the first flight was in 1981. And it was a 30-year history of the Space Shuttle program. So it flew from 1981 until 2011, 30 years of Space Shuttle flights for that system. And as we talked about, a very reliable system. But think about that. If the Space Shuttle flew for the first time in 1981, that means they had to be building and designing that system in the early 70s, the early 1970s, and that's exactly what was taking place. So the concept of a reusable spacecraft was actually first thought of in the 1950s, but the prototyping actually began for construction and design of the space shuttle early 1970s. Now, by the mid-1970s, something very interesting was taking place. By the mid-1970s, they were trying to actually design the prototypes for the space shuttle. And so these prototypes started out small, kind of like the one we have here on the desk, and they saw how pieces were going to go together. They got larger than that. And so what we're going to talk about is a larger prototype from the space shuttle era, and what role that played in the space shuttle program. But before we do that,
yes, sir,
I'd like to just remind folks that we already have a fantastic collection of space shuttle artifacts at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center already in place.
Oh, yes.
And I think we can show some pictures of some of those pieces. Some of the pieces that are already down there include a front tire for the space shuttle, which is kind of fun. That front tire actually was on the John Glenn flight when John Glenn went back to space.
Okay.
On board a space shuttle, that tire
great.
was on board. You can see this photograph. You see a couple of guys in orange suits. Those are they're dealing with the escape basket, which is part of the emergency egress system from Launch Pad 39A. So that's one of the other pieces that's down there, is one of those escape baskets from that system. An onboard computer, which you can see in the lower right-hand frame. Right there in the center, that's a heat tile. We have one of the heat tiles in our display cases there. A pane of glass from the cockpit. That's an artifact that we have received but has not yet arrived. So we're waiting on the arrival of that one. And then a very special piece up in the upper right-hand corner here. You see one of the consoles from Launch Control Complex at the Kennedy Space Center. Now, I think we can go to the next frame. We can show this particular artifact in a little bit more detail. Right there in the center, you see one of our early preliminary locations for this console when it came in. But that is the flight surgeon's station from the Launch Control Complex in firing room number 3 at the Kennedy Space Center. And some of the other pictures you can see here are all photographs of us retrieving that artifact from the Kennedy Space Center. Now, we were the first ones to be able to remove one of these consoles as an artifact from that Launch Control Complex. And so we were very, very excited. In that lower right-hand image, you can see some of the engineers. They were meeting with us that day when we removed it. This was like one of their children going off to college, you can kind of imagine. So,
yes.
So this is a neat piece. This piece is already on display at the Space Science Center. You can come down and actually see where the flight surgeons sat at Launch Control Complex, firing room number 3 at the Kennedy Space Center.
And so we all have memories of those television shots with in that room with all of those control centers there, and the group of people behind each one talking to each other and being a part of that. That's real history.
It truly
for
is.
all of us in this setting. And you have a piece right here at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. I will wonderful is that? We got to go see that. If you haven't, make that trip for sure.
We would invite anybody who has any kind of interest in either history or in the space program, or you're just a techno geek and you like geeky techno stuff, come down and see these pieces because they really were a historic part of America's space program. Now, one more piece that's already on display, which is our biggest and proudest piece thus far, is our space shuttle main engine nozzle. And the space shuttle main engine nozzle, you can see it firing on the test stand at the Stennis Space Center here on the left. At the right-hand side, that's a receiving ceremony. Those are some folks from the Marshall Space Flight Center and from NASA headquarters. They were there to award us this main engine nozzle. And you can see in the next set of photographs, we actually had to load it up on the flatbed of a semi-truck and bring it back to town, which we did do. And it's been in our exhibit gallery now for a couple of years. So it made a trip home back to Columbus, Georgia, and is now in our exhibit gallery at the Space Science Center.
You know, we've had some earlier shows that went through that. Remember we had the time-lapse video of you getting that main engine into the Coca-Cola Space Science Center building, and it wasn't that easy.
It was not easy.
It was not an easy thing, but
process.
you did it. But it was not easy. But quite an adventure. So people can tune back to some of the earlier episodes of this show, Twiss, and see all of that from moment one all the way through.
Right.
So very nice.
Well, now that brings us to the grand announcement, though,
Okay.
which is a brand new announcement of a brand new artifact. It's coming to Columbus State University, to the Coca-Cola Space Science Center in Columbus, Georgia. It's going to be put on display right there on Front Avenue in the uptown area of Columbus.
Oh, I thought this was it, right?
No, this is not it. So this is a model of the space shuttle.
Okay.
But what we're talking about is actually not even a model of the space shuttle. It's an engineering prototype. And it's just a little bit bigger than the one that's sitting on the desk right here.
That's
In
a
fact,
good size.
it's going to be our biggest artifact of them all. You can see it there on the right-hand side when it was being displayed at the Rockwell plant in Downey, California. This is where they did a series of testing on this prototype. This prototype's very big. It's 1/4 the size of the actual space shuttle. So they call it a quarter scale. It's 1/4 scale of the actual space shuttle. Now, the actual space shuttle stood approximately 180 feet tall. So this thing is almost 50 feet long. It's 46 feet long from the bottom of the SRBs all the way to the top of the main fuel tank. The orbiter itself is approximately 30 feet long. And so this is a very large engineering prototype. And I keep saying engineering prototype because that's exactly what it is. It's not just a model. They built this system to be as structurally both structurally and in terms of the materials that it was made out of, to be as much like the actual space shuttle as they possibly could. So they were trying to replicate the actual materials that they were going to use for all the parts of the space shuttle, including the SRBs, the solid rocket boosters on the outside, what they made the main tank out of, the proportional weight ratios of those things, what the wings were made out of versus what the fuselage of the shuttle was made out of. They even tried to model the rivets, and apparently that was very difficult because once you squeeze rivets down to 1/4 scale, they get very tiny. But they tried to, with as much integrity as possible, recreate both the structural and the aerodynamic components of not just the orbiter, and the orbiter is the part that looks like an airplane, but also the rest of the stack, which is that external fuel tank and those solid rocket boosters. They tried to get that as close to correct as possible. Now, there was a very important reason why they did this. Think about the era in which this prototype was being constructed. It was the mid-1970s. What was computer power like back then? Well, they could certainly run mathematical and some limited computer modeling back then, but it certainly was not what it is today in terms of just the computing power and being able to recreate in simulation form the flight dynamics, the vibration dynamics of a very complex system like the space shuttle. Ladies and gentlemen, the space shuttle system is the most complicated machine ever created by human beings.
There you go.
It had more electronics and more moving parts than any other machine in history. And so that gives you an idea. Trying to model that with 1970s computer power, well, let's just say they did not place full trust in their mathematical modeling. They needed actual physical verification and some physical parameters to replug into those math models to make it as accurate as possible. Here's why. Here's another important characteristic about the space shuttle. When the space shuttle flew, for the very first time. They could not fly the space shuttle system unpiloted. In other words, when they built big rockets prior to space shuttle, they could always launch a test version and have it be remotely controlled and let it splash down in the ocean, and maybe it blew up on the launch pad, maybe it fell safely into the ocean and everything went fine. But they had no people on board, so the risk factor in terms of human life at least was a lot less with those rockets. When the space shuttle flew for the first time, there had to be pilots on board, which means they had to get it right the first time. Yes. They had to know how not only the space shuttle orbiter would fly through the atmosphere, but also this entire stack with the main fuel tank and the solid rocket boosters made it up to the orbiter. This is a very complex piece of machinery when you understand that it's all kind of bolted together and pieces can vibrate during launch. The aerodynamics changes as the fuel gets used up in the solid rocket boosters, as the fuel in the tank gets used up. When the fuel in the tank goes down some and vibrations are being supplied to this orbiter via the engines, the fuel can actually start to bounce inside the main fuel tank. They call that the pogo effect. So that fuel bouncing around, it's like sloshing of milk in a milk truck can actually cause the milk truck to tip over. Well, the sloshing around of the liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen in that main fuel tank could actually create structural problems and dynamic problems for the system on liftoff. They had to understand all of those characteristics very, very well. In addition to that, there were vibrational resonances that could occur. And so if the vibrational frequencies of the engine match those resonances within the structure, it could actually shake the whole structure apart. So those resonances needed to be very well understood before the actual shuttle flew. The quarter scale model was the largest model ever created. That was the biggest prototype that NASA could build before it actually built a full-scale prototype.
I was wondering about that. So this model had to be completed, and they were in testing before they would start the actual full-scale.
That's exactly right.
Shuttle.
So it was very interesting. It was a very important piece of the engineering process to lead finally to a very reliable space system that the shuttle was.
And with that, they may make some changes in building the actual shuttle based on that. So it was coming along. If they found something new, found a different way to do something, they would then employ that into the one that they were actually building.
That's exactly right. And I can give you an example of something that they did change. So one of the things that they found out, when the orbiter launched, when the space shuttle launched, it actually bent over in an angle. So the orbiter and the space shuttle's main engine tank, the main fuel tank, kind of bent like this, about a 13-degree angle during launch. Well, they found out that the main fuel tank, when the fuel was down a little ways and they bent it over at that angle caused the tank itself to crumple. Now they found that out on the quarter scale, and so what they did is they pressurized the tank. They actually put gas in the tank that would actually pressurize it and keep it under pressure to support that tank from within. Well, that turned out to be a very important lesson, because without that pressurization in that tank, that whole tank would have crumpled during the launch process. Wow. Once the liquid fuel started to go down. So that's a very good example of something that was learned during the quarter scale program.
Piece, yes.
Yeah, very important piece that then led to the pressurization of the main tank for the actual space shuttle as well. So there are a whole variety of these kinds of lessons that were learned from this quarter scale model, which makes it a very important artifact in terms of the history of the space shuttle program.
All right, and it's coming to the Coca-Cola Space Science Center.
It is coming to the Space Science Center. It was once the space shuttle program was retired back in 2011. There was no more need for the prototype anymore. So what they did, NASA decided to lend it for a little while to Canada. So at least the orbiter, so the space shuttle, the orbiter itself, the part that looks like an airplane, actually was hanging in the Calgary International Airport since 2010. Now here's a photograph of it hanging in the atrium of the Calgary International Airport. They've actually developed a little science museum around this orbiter, right? So here it is there. There's a not-to-scale space shuttle astronaut.
Yes, he looks a little big compared to that.
He's a little bit big. He's flying around untethered. He's flying around tethered. However, his hose is coming out of a closed cargo bay door.
Yeah,
which
that's not good.
It put him in jeopardy. I think that might put him in danger, but that's okay.
Well,
so at least gives the kids the idea that that's how astronauts would fly around when they were next to the space shuttle. They were tethered like that on a big line, and so they could go out and do what are called EVAs, or extra vehicular activities, on the outside of the space shuttle. To fix various things, or to perform various experiments, or do repairs, or to build an international space station, which is something they did a whole lot of EVAs about.
You know, Sean, I noticed that on that model too, it did have the name that had the Columbia on that.
I think that label was something that was added by the Calgary International Airport. I can tell you that label is still on the orbiter, because after it was done with the Calgary International Airport, after they were finished with it, NASA requested it back. This orbiter was actually scheduled to come back and go on display at the Smithsonian at one point, next to the actual Space Shuttle Discovery at the National Air and Space Museum at the Udvar-Hazy Center. However, the timing for that didn't work out right. Smithsonian didn't have an availability for it. They designed the rest of their display without the prototype, because of the timing of the situation, and so NASA made it available, and we applied for it. And
okay, let me interject a little bit. All right, so you had to know that this was available. Did somebody notify you? Did they send letters out and said, you know, if you're interested, send in an application?
Yes.
And you had to go through an application process.
That's correct. So we are registered with NASA as a recipient of artifacts. So we're notified when new artifacts come available. I can tell you this, as we're filming the show here, this is the summer of 2014. We found out about the existence of this artifact in February of 2014.
Okay.
So from February to July, the rest of this process that I'm about to describe has occurred. So we found out about the artifact, we put together an application, we applied to receive it. We let them know that our application was going to be, our ability to display this was going to be contingent on fundraising. Apparently that was okay, because we were awarded this artifact in less than a month from the time that we applied.
Oh, I like it. Good turnaround time.
And when we were notified about the artifact, we were also notified about a very quick turnaround in order of us being able to receive it. So they wanted to transport this to us in May. So from, say, mid-March to May is all the preparation time we had to get ready for at least the orbiter portion of this artifact to come. Now you have to understand, it's got a 19-foot wingspan. It's 30 feet long, which means it's difficult to transport. The wings don't come off. It's a very difficult piece to transport because it's wide enough that it occupies 2 lanes of an interstate highway. And so between the folks at the Calgary International Airport and their logistics team, and our logistics team with Steve Morris here at Columbus State University, we were able to work out the trucking details to be able to have this artifact shipped safely from Canada. And I can tell you that it has arrived here in the greater Columbus area. I'm not at liberty to discuss exactly where it's being stored. It's at an Area 51-like facility, a secret government storage facility somewhere in the region. But I can't really disclose that location because it is top secret. But the artifact is safe,
but it's here.
It has arrived. It is in the area.
All right, you guys have got to have a lot of work to do. That's got to be done before this thing goes into the center. Yeah. So, do you have room? You've got specs and have looked at how you're going to display this?
One of the things that we have, which was an asset when the building was constructed, we have what is right now an outdoor entryway or an atrium. It's kind of like a big porch on the front of the Space Science Center, but it is actually under steel, so it's under part of our roof. What will be required to display this fairly giant artifact is for us to be able to go ahead and finish off that portion of our center and enclose that portion of our center. So complete the roof, glass in the front, and this space shuttle, not only the shuttle itself, but also the external tank and the solid rocket boosters will look something like this when it goes on display.
Oh, nice.
So this is a concept drawing right now, but this is our concept of how we envision displaying that prototype once it arrives. So we will display it mated to its main external fuel tank and also to the solid rocket boosters. We'll display it at an angle And here you don't see any support structure, but that's just an artistic license. There will be support structure that actually supports the whole system right there.
Absolutely.
But this is just to give an idea of how it could fit inside that space. And you can see the glass work that's on the outside of that. That'll be the glass that goes in place to enclose this in that front atrium area of the Space Science Center. So this is our concept, and we want to display it this way for two reasons. Number one, if we stood it up, it would be way too tall.
Right.
It would be much taller than the roof of our building as it exists right now. So that would be a little bit problematic. The second reason, though, is when it lays over on its side, it makes it accessible. So if it's laying like this, that means that we can walk students right up and we can show them the whole orbiter and how it made it to the tank, how the SRBs were attached, how the cargo bay doors would open, where the main engines are located on the actual space shuttle. And remember, we have a main engine nozzle sitting in our gallery, so we can refer them to that and let them walk over and see on the prototype where that system was, where it was located. And so this is, from an educational standpoint, a much more satisfying way to display this particular artifact. Now, the other thing that we want to do, we have an engineering program here at Columbus State University. This prototype is a perfect case study in systems engineering and design. So we can actually teach classes using this prototype right here at Columbus State University for our engineering students and have a one-of-a-kind space shuttle engineering prototype to be the example and the case study for that. One of the things I can tell you, we've been doing a little research online. It turns out that MIT offered a course in aircraft and spacecraft system design where they also referred to our quarter scale model in great detail in teaching that course. And so that's the kind of course that we hope to emulate here, something that the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has already done, and we'll be able to emulate that kind of a course right here and be able to teach it in a very hands-on way with a prototype actually existing in the atrium of the Space Science Center. So the two reasons we have found out that we have been awarded this very interesting artifact. One of the things that was in our favor is because we are a university and we will be using it from the academic standpoint to be able to teach students. The second reason is we were able to take not only the orbiter but also the external tank and solid rocket boosters and display the whole thing. Something that's very interesting, we've spoken to Dr. Valerie Neal, who is the lead curator for human spaceflight at the National Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian. She discussed this prototype with us and she said, hey, you need to realize that the piece that you have, the artifact that's coming to your facility, is the only example of the orbiter, the external tank, and the solid rocket boosters all being displayed together in the same place that actually have historical provenance. In other words, they were actually used together as part of the Space Shuttle program. So in various locations you can see the whole orbiter on display at the Kennedy Space Center, at the California Science Center, at the Smithsonian, and even in some of those locations there are external tanks and SRBs, but they're either faux or they're separated, they're not displayed together. This will be the only location where you can walk in and see an orbiter, an external tank, and solid rocket boosters, albeit a scale model version of that, but that were actually used as part of the Space Shuttle program on display in the same location. So that is a very important piece. It makes us tremendously excited about the history of this artifact, about the fact that components of this artifact are still going to be used in the next generation space system for NASA coming up, and the fact that the city of Columbus is going to have such a wonderful artifact right in their uptown area, and Columbus State University is able to provide that for the city and also teach its students all in one location at CSU's Coca-Cola Space Science Center on Front Avenue.
Wow, that's a pretty amazing announcement today, Sean. Thank you so much for talking about this. You know, I was wondering too, they actually did the testing on it. We had some of those pictures earlier where it was upright and it looked like some scientists around in the white lab coats were working on it and those kind of things. And I just wonder what they have from documentation and maybe some video and some other kinds of things. Here's an example I was talking about. You know, when they did some testing, they must have recorded quite a bit from their testing of this model.
Yeah, so the one thing I can tell you is we've at least had a little bit of a hard time finding original photos. We do have a handful, some of those that you've already seen.
But this was the 70s.
It was the mid-1970s, 1976, 1977, in that area. So we are not privy to any video that may exist from this testing period, although we think some might exist. Our friends at the Smithsonian have offered to help us try to locate some of these things. I can tell you the stuff that we have located already, though, that's very important. We already have in possession the scientific papers that were written by the scientists who were doing the testing, the scientists and engineers who were actually doing the testing.
Yes.
And so we do know what the results of that testing were and the role that we played, the kind of testing they did, what they found out. And so we have some of that documentation already. And so that's a part that we have of that artifact's history that we're going to be able to be using both in classes and in our displays for the artifact at the Space Science Center.
Wow, that's going to be nice. It's going to be a great learning experience just to go and see this. But I imagine by the time it's displayed, you'll have a lot more information and other artifacts that may just kind of help with this.
Exactly.
This.
Now, the one thing, thank you very much, thank you. The one thing I want to make sure and say, and I'm not very comfortable asking for help or for money, but there might be people out there who hear this message, who want to get involved, who want to help make this a reality in downtown Columbus. We are in the fundraising stage. And so if you would like to get involved, there's a way for you to do so. And I think we have a slider we can put up on the screen, but you can contact our assistant director at the Space Science Center, Mary Johnson, and her email is up there in yellow, mary@ccssc.org. Mary is heading up all the fundraising efforts for this artifact and its future display. Contact Mary, tell her you want to help out, tell her you just want to keep in the loop. You want to be part of the process. We will send you out email alerts about new developments in the future of this artifact coming to the Space Science Center and the progress that we're making with raising the funds and putting this thing on display. So you can find out all that information just by sending Mary an email, and we will keep you in the loop. And you can also help us by just spreading the word. If you see this video, tell people, hey, there's a really amazing NASA space shuttle artifact coming to be on display permanently, not on temporary loan, but permanently at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center at Columbus State University. Help us get that word out, help us to generate the excitement, because we're really excited about the future of this fantastic artifact coming to Columbus. And we feel like if we do this the right way, these artifacts from NASA will be on display at that same location 100 years from now. That's the goal that we have. We want to be able to do this in a high quality manner to have a permanent home for these artifacts in Columbus, so that 100 years from now, future generations can come back and see these components from America's space shuttle program.
Ah, that's a wonderful. I love that dream. 100 years from now, and you know, you guys do it right anyway. If you've ever been to the Coca-Cola Space Science Center, you know what we're talking about here. But if you haven't, please, by all means, take a trip down Front Avenue, down by Broadway, downtown Columbus. Take a look at what we have at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. It is worth the trip. Many kids and kids in school in this area and in the region have been through that and got your training. We talked about that many times. But yeah, this is a really a significant contribution, one that will be there permanently, as you said. So if you're viewing this video, I agree with Sean. Take a look at how you can help with this process and contact Mary at ccssc.org.
That's correct.
I think that's a great thing to remember. Get in touch with Mary, talk to Sean about that, visit the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. This is something you can get in the process with and support. So we support you. We want to ask you to do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been This Week in Space Science. I'm Michael Baltimore. It's my pleasure to be with Sean Cruz and the Executive Director. Thank you for watching. Continue to watch us here on Columbus State Television, on the Roku, on iTunes. Hey, and we'll see you next week on Twiss.